So it's really important to describe when abortion is justified or not. First, you have to figure out the definitions people are using when they're talking about it. But as I said, I define abortion as procedures or medications where the death of the embryo or fetus is expected, and if not expected, it's ensured. I think it's justified when the woman's life is in danger. I also think it's justified even if her life might not be in danger, but there's major impairment of a bodily function. There are severe medical related reasons when it is justified, I believe. It's still tragic and sad, but it might be necessary. And you could talk about it in terms of triage or self-defense or however you want. I don't think it's unprecedented, and I don't think it's that confusing. I think it's justified in those cases. And then people ask us all the time, the other two major categories of what we call the hard cases are rape and what most people call fetal anomaly. So I think those cases are more complicated. I think we should give grace to people who might be against abortion in the cases of consensual sex when there's no medical emergency and it just seems unnecessary, but they're less sure in these cases. I think that's legitimate. I think it's more ethically complicated. I still think abortion is immoral, even in terms of rape and even in terms of fetal anomaly. But whether or not it should be legal, I think, is a harder question. And this especially is the case when we're talking about children who have been the victims of sexual assault. I don't think that it's strange to recognize that you're dealing with very ethically difficult and complicated situations, and people can come to different conclusions. I reject entirely the idea that if you are conflicted about these, it must mean you don't care about children in utero. I think we should be offering first and foremost resources to people. I think people need to especially understand, in the context of rape, people need to especially understand that society so ubiquitously assumes that a woman who conceives in rape will want an abortion that if she doesn't, they question whether she's telling the truth about the rape. This is documented. There's a Georgetown Law article that talks about it, and we have anecdotally. I've saved tweets from people saying, a woman will say, I conceived in rape, my child life has value, and someone will say, well, it must not have been a very traumatic rape or something like that. So I think we can find common ground here, regardless of what you think of the legality of abortion, that is not an appropriate response. Whether you are pro-life or pro-choice, you certainly don't want anyone getting an abortion because they feel like they're supposed to or because they feel like they'll be mocked or derided if they don't. But there are going to be women who conceived in rape who want abortions, and I think that legal situation is difficult. I think the bodily rights arguments for abortion are important. I don't think they justify most of them, but it's going to be more difficult in the cases of rape. I still think you are killing a valuable human being. I think you should not. But in terms of the legality, I do think it's harder. And then fetal anomaly, I think a lot of times we use the phrase fetal anomaly way too loosely. We have tons of anecdotes of false positive diagnosis. And I think more importantly, we have tons of situations where the diagnosis was correct, but that child's life still had value. And the way the medical community in particular treats parents and families who would like to treat their fetus as their valuable child is atrocious. And this is not just anecdotes. There's research. There's self-reported surveys of physicians saying, I think it was something like 23% of physicians self-reported that they would purposefully emphasize the negative aspects of Down syndrome or just straight encourage the parents to abort. Now, most physicians said they would try to be neutral. I'm not saying all physicians do that, but 23%, and that's of the people who will admit it overtly in a survey. The ableism in the medical community that intersects with this issue is enormous. We see it also with trisomy 18, with trisomy 13. If you go to the group Be Not Afraid, they have tons of research and stories about this. So again, similar to the conversation about rape, I think pro-choice and pro-life should be able to agree that nobody should be getting an abortion because they feel that they will be mocked or derided or not supported when they love their child with disabilities. I think this is a huge failing. But again, there will be people who get these diagnoses who want abortions. And I think it's immoral. I think that you are killing a valuable human being. I sympathize with how stressful it is. I do. I sympathize with how stressful disability diagnoses are in general. And I think we could do better to support parents and better to educate the public. But bottom line, if you were prepared to carry that pregnancy and love that child otherwise, and now you don't want to, okay, but that's not about bodily rights. That's not about not being ready to have a child. That's about not being ready to have a child with disabilities. And I have a child with a diagnosis of a disability. I know many people with disabilities or with loved ones with disabilities. This is a different conversation. Abortion is sort of incidental to this. This is a conversation about how we define able-bodied, how we define disability, and who has an equal right to live. So, to summarize, I think abortion should absolutely be legal and accessible when someone's life is in danger or when there's a major impairment of bodily function. I think the situations regarding conception and rape are more complicated, and I just leave space for people to have different views on that. And while I recognize that my position on abortion in the cases of severe fetal diagnoses is probably unpopular, if I'm blunt, yeah, I think that's immoral. I don't think it's justified.